Hello, and welcome to another episode of the LSAT Report. I'm Rick, your host. Before I get going, I wanted to give a little shout out to the Vikings. I am, in case you didn't know, here in the middle of the tundra. It's freaking cold outside today. Anyway, wanted to also give a little spoiler alert to anybody that might be facing the Vikings in the Super Bowl. Sorry, guys, it's our year. You're going to lose. It'll be a pretty handy win, I'm guessing. Anybody that was around me last year knows my track record on being able to prognosticate. And so, outside of it being a perfect rags to riches story, a hometown hero quarterback, we also just purchased a stadium. And so the NFL is going to want to put a few of those around the states. And if we don't have a good story, it's going to be harder to sell. That's just my take on it. It all comes down to money, pretty much for everything. So, as promised in the last episode, I said I was going to get into all the hubbub around DACA. And so this episode is called DACA Turns to Caca, but does that mean DACA's done? And we've been told that, and I say, let's see about that. So, last Tuesday, I believe a week ago, on the 9th of January, there was a meeting called by Trump. And what makes this one significant is that it was, number one, bipartisan. And I've been on boards, and so I understand the process. Anybody else that understands, has been involved in boards, also knows the process. And this seemed very similar to that. Even some correspondents who aren't necessarily Trump friendly were saying, she didn't think that it would be any different than what she saw. And the reason I say that is the press was let in to watch this. And so I actually took some time and actually watched the whole thing. And it was a good indication of how things are potentially changing. We'll see. But there were a few things that I wanted to point out in there. First of all, the players were, number one, the press was in there. And they were very thankful for it. And as I said, they didn't have any indication that it wouldn't operate the same whether they were there or not. Secondly, it was bilateral. And what that allowed was for people on both sides to hear the other people's thought process. Typically what goes on is they go their separate ways. They're in their little rooms together in an echo chamber, more or less, with their own paradigm, and they get to bounce the ideas off each other. And now I'm going to take all the politics out of it, but just human nature involved. If you're with a group of people and you come up with a really good idea or what you think is a solution, and you bring it to someone, and the first thing they do is, probably out of mistrust, because that's what gets built into the system, they shoot it down. Well, you're put off. Your hard work has not been recognized, and so you form an enemy. And both sides do this, and they come together and wonder why nothing gets done. But you need to hear, in my opinion, the thought process behind the idea. See where everybody got. That way, things could get headed off before they went so far that you invested a ton of time and energy into it. And so that was the difference, and that was recognized, and it was recognized by just about everybody in the room. Again, some of the players that were there we obviously have Donald Trump, we have the Secretary of DHS, Department of Homeland Security, you also have Dianne Feinstein. These are some of the big hitters anyway. Kevin McCarthy. Sitting right next to Trump on his immediate left was Steny Hoyer, and been around for a long time, and in my view, kind of old school liberal. Actually kind of believed in the old school. Wasn't as much of a progressive. I could be wrong on that, but that was my take, especially seeing him in the meeting. And then on his left or on his right was Dick Durbin, who we'll get to later. And Dick Durbin looked extremely comfortable the whole time, even though he was sitting right next. I can't say the same for Steny. He just looked more perturbed at times, although he didn't strike me as someone that I would have to necessarily mistrust for any reason. And part of what I do when I go into these things is I try to look at different avenues for really investigating. And one of the things I found is there's someone online who does a lot of body language analysis, and it's super interesting stuff. A lot of it you can corroborate by watching it. That's a guy, you'd be able to tell. It strikes you as being, wow, that's what that means. Or anybody that watches the show Lie to Me, they take a lot. It's based out of, it has a scientific basis. Excuse me. She is ex-military, and so I don't mistrust her analysis, and it really laid it out pretty good and gives some good insight. That being aside, Trump also in this meeting, and it was seconded by a bunch of them, is they had come down to, and you've probably heard this, come down to basically two things that they needed to accomplish. They weren't going to go for a comprehensive immigration bill because that's been death to all sides. The frustration arises from that. And what they wanted to deal with specifically was DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and also border security. And it was pretty much decided upon by the majority of the people, regardless of the side, that those two things would be the things that they would handle. Now, this is also coming down to, it's tied into the budget, and so they're coming down to the wire by Friday. And so there's some pressures that are building here, and this all comes into play. So anyway, we have these people around, and they're all in agreement on what they're going to cover. And then in comes Dianne Feinstein. Now, she has been just recently also kind of a troublemaker, or at least it seems that way. And so when she leaked the testimony from the GPS guy, and then kind of corrupted the entire investigation regarding, I laugh, it's not funny, but it kind of is. I look at it as kind of entertainment. I'm totally mystified by how much we're actually seeing and is being thrown in the interest level in politics now. I have some other ideas, but I'm going to keep this thing as short as possible. So we have Dianne Feinstein comes in, and she says, we'd like to do, why don't we look at a clean DACA bill? Now, Trump has his way of doing things, and he has his set agenda, as he should when he sets the meeting forth, and then the people around the table, Congress, are supposed to figure it out from there, which is how it's supposed to work. Unfortunately, you have a lot of sides. Now, a lot of it is brinksmanship and games that they play. I understand that, but Dianne Feinstein brought that up. And then there was another gentleman sitting to her right, 2 people down, who was obviously from a border state and saying how the wall doesn't work. Well, I've heard this argument, and okay, maybe we don't need an entire wall, and that's exactly what they all talked about, including Trump, is, hey, we don't need it all the way, there's different things that can be done, but there is portions that need to be done. In regard to the statement that walls don't work, they use the example of, check out Israel. They seem to think it's okay, seems to be working. But my whole thought, we don't have any issue believing that a wall is a great barrier when you're talking about a prison. No, it's functional. Now, I don't want to indicate that I think the border wall is somehow a prison. I think, obviously, it serves the purpose of keeping out the things we don't want to have come in without some kind of checks and balances anyway. So he was pretty much shot down, and it wasn't only Trump that shot him down. The look around the room was, oh, great, this is exactly what we need. And DHS specifically came out and said, hey, you know what, we just told everybody what we need in order to do the job that you asked us to do. So to move this forward, we have this meeting that by all indication, people were pretty excited about on both sides, that they finally were getting this chance to move things forward, not the typical stop and go traffic, or I don't mind that a lot of times that laws don't get passed, because, you know what, I think we have enough laws. I'd like to see a few taken off the books. We've got a lot of laws out there that are just silly. You hear stories about you can't tie your horse outside the establishment, or you can't spit bubble gum on the floor, or things that go into how you're supposed to, two consenting adults can't live life how they want to. So, and I don't think that that's right. But we need potentially less laws, less infringement. So that meeting went on, and it looked like everything was moving forward. Even the press was saying, well, it looks really hopeful. Trump seems to be on board with DACA. And then you had the next meeting, the alleged shithole comment. And this kind of put the brakes on things. And so at first glance, and what we're heard, you hear stories, it's racism, it's all these other things, and I have my view on it. I don't particularly think that calling a country that's hurting a hurting country is a problem. How it was said, it's obviously going to cause some problems. I actually think there's a good reason for that, though, and I'll get into that analysis. That's where it just seems like things are kind of lining up this way. So in attendance at that were Dick Durbin, Senator Cotton, the DHS Secretary, Lindsey Graham. There was some other ones, obviously Trump was there as well. And so Dick Durbin comes out and says that he said these things. Lindsey Graham said something kind of interesting. He said, well, he basically said that. And then some of the other ones are saying, no, I don't recall that was said. Basically kind of inferring that, well, what was said, maybe it was said, but it wasn't in that way. He wasn't referring to those countries that way, or the meaning behind it was different. And so I don't necessarily doubt that he said it. I guess he's got the mouth on him. Kind of gets away from him, obviously, but I have a hard time believing that he got where he did in business or anywhere, especially negotiations, by accident. That would be, for me, kind of a stretch. And so, I look at it, I try to be as objective as possible. I'm not going to label him as a total a-hole. I'm not going to say he's the saint and savior of us all. I don't believe either of those things. It's somewhere in the middle. And when he's construed as a total horrible person all the time, there's very few people that actually fit that bill. And when someone's labeled negatively across the board, universally, I'm going to take what that person's saying with a grain of salt. So anyway, we have that. Now, my analysis of this is I don't believe DACA's dead. You got to take into account, these are politicians. They think like politicians. Now, first and foremost, immigration. So a little bit of idea on what is the problem anyway. Why are we meeting? What's DACA about? I think it's important to understand that before we go forward. Here you have, in immigration, you basically have to check some boxes before you become a citizen. One of them is you need to be, in order to get your adjustment of status, you need to be inspected and admitted. Okay? So if you check those boxes off, you're fine. Unfortunately, the DACA people and some of the TPS people, temporary protection people, they came in, they were uninspected. It means you didn't go through border security, a checklist or a guard or whatever. You didn't go through immigration. And so you're here. Now, you can fit into those categories based upon, in TPS, as if you come from a country that's going through some turmoil for either natural catastrophe or political catastrophe, or you're in danger. And we'll bring those people in. We let them in all the time. There's, I don't even know the numbers, but hundreds of thousands of people that are actually looking at having that temporary be enacted. Now, they have options to become citizens as well. They've got their time, and it's not going to be cut straight off. In some cases, I think El Salvador, they have 18 months in order to either continue or start that process. And it can be as simple as leaving the country for things like humanitarian or a job or education. You leave the country and you come back in, and they will count that as long as you ask for permission, basically. And so you can't just leave specifically for the sake of I just want to become a citizen. There has to be a legitimate reason. But I did watch some videos, and there was some attorneys. This, again, is not funny either, but everybody's going to game the system. And they said, even as much as the dentist, going to the dentist and coming back in can qualify. So whatever. It's a game. Okay, we've made it a game. Our system is broken. That's why they're meeting. That's TPS. Now, things have been kind of conflated between that because they're kind of brought into the light at the same time. DACA, on the other hand, is... So TPS, they've come from a place. They had a homeland. They came here because it was dangerous. DACA came here maybe for the same reasons, but these are people that fall between, and I don't have my notes with me currently, but it's a 5-year period from 2007 to 2012, April 15th on both of those. And you had to be 15 or below. You couldn't, 16 or below. You couldn't be 16, you had to be 15 or below on April 15th of 2007, all the way up to, couldn't be more than 31 years old by April 15th of 2012. So the people that fall in there, and there's about 1 million of them from what I can tell. Those people were brought here. They don't have a homeland that they were rescued from, that they came from, not necessarily. And so, and you have 80% at least of the population is behind this. Everybody in that room in that first meeting on the 9th was behind this. We have to get this taken care of. And basically, to sum it up, what they're going to try to do is create... DACA is not an immigration status. Okay, it's not it's not your status. It is a deferred action. So they're considered illegal, and for, in this case, no fault of their own. Obviously, it's no fault of their own with the TPS as well, for the most part. But these people, they're kids. They don't have a homeland. They couldn't leave the country. Where are they going to go if they left the country to go to the consulate and go through the process? And they can be put on hold. In certain countries, we have limits on all these countries. Some of them, if you could be put to the back of the line, it could take and if you don't follow the rules, it's 3 to 10 years before you can try again. Obviously, DACA requires that you, number one, aren't breaking the law. You can't have a criminal record. Number two, you have to be either a student or employed. You have to be a contributing citizen, which is what we want. If immigrants are going to come, that's all we want. It's legal immigration. But unfortunately, these people fall through the cracks, and so they have to find a way to stop that gap. You have to fill that crack so that those people don't keep falling through it, lift in limbo. So anyway, these dreamers can't be in La La Land anymore, and that's pretty much consensus. You have some hardliners who are just going to be that way. I'm not one of them. I think they deserve to be here in a shot. But what they also need to do at the same time, so we don't revisit this, so it isn't always another 2 years, is to have that, we need to close the border. We need to stop more of this from happening. Otherwise, we're just going to return. So that's the other side of it. So there's a couple things. I believe that Washington is Hollywood for ugly people. They're a bunch of actors. They do what they need to in order to get votes. That's number one. Number two is there's things that bring people together. You can either have a common enemy or a common goal. And in this case, I think these two things are lining up. I think there's a lot of acting going on. You have people that start out all angry. For instance, Bernie Sanders. He had nothing but outrage at Trump's comments. Today, he says, well, he may not have said those things or whatever those things, but that's not what we should be concentrating on. I mean, calling him a racist is simply, it doesn't make any sense. That was Bernie Sanders. You have Jeff Flake saying he's Stalin. Jeff Flake, I believe when he announced he wasn't going to be running a little while ago, he blamed Trump for that too. Instead of the fact that, he left out the fact that his numbers are horrible in Arizona. So he's going to blame him instead of, it sounds like Hillary, like blaming everybody for her loss. No, you ran your horrible campaign. You're a horrible person in my opinion too, but that's just my opinion. There's facts to back it too, but anyway. So, and then the last piece of this puzzle is you have the tax reform that just passed. And why this matters is you had the leaked DNC email or memo talking about how losing the Dreamers, the TPS people, would have serious negative impact on the DNC's future electoral outcome. That was in their own memo. Now, so are they looking at it the right way? And if these people aren't legal, what are they doing voting? That's the two questions I have. It seems a little fishy. Not that it's weird that the DNC would potentially be involved in a fishy electoral process. Right, Bernie? Maybe Bernie finally saying, you know what, I'm pissed off about this too. Enough that I'm actually going to say something. So that's another thing. But going back to the tax reform, a lot of these people are in, at least in general, in Congress, are looking at re-election. There's a whole bunch of them. There's a lot of people not returning, Jeff Flake being one of them. There's also a lot of talk in kind of the conspiracy world, I'll say. I'm not sure that the QAnon stuff, where they're saying, hey, there's going to be a third that aren't going to be returning, and we already saw a whole mess of Republicans that aren't going to be. Is this what draining the swamp meant? I don't know. So you have the provision in the tax reform, though, where it says that you can't deduct state and local taxes from your federal return. Well, most of these people raising hell on it are looking at, electoral impact regardless, and they're going to be faced with now the tax rates that they have in those states, such as California, Minnesota, New York, and what surprised me, Iowa. Now, Iowa, I don't know how high they're a pretty high tax rate, because I did try to correspond these. High tax rate and high amounts of immigration, of immigrants that live there, whether they be dreamers or TPS or whatever it might be. There's a lot of agriculture in those areas. And so it all comes down to money. It's economic at its base. And so these guys are looking at, crap, now we have to face the music. And Minnesota's already talking about, oh, geez, we're going to have to look at our taxes to line up more with the federal. Well, all that means is, well, we've been jacking you around for so long and you've been able to write it off. It doesn't matter to us. We can write off all your, portion of your state taxes on your federal return. You don't have to pay us, and it washes it out a little bit. Well, now they're actually going to have to face the impact of spending all this money. And there are obviously economic good that come from immigration, but there's the cost of educating these people, housing in a lot of, all those things for a period of time until they get up to that point. And I'm not putting good or bad labels on it. It's just a fact. It costs money. And these people have high taxes. There's high taxes for a reason. Now they're going to have to face the consequences for that, where they didn't have to before. Well, I believe, and I'm going to round this up pretty quick here, that by Trump making the comment, or that it was alleged, was possibly they put there as political cover for these guys. They all want DACA, which is controversial. They want border control, which is controversial. And they're all going to be facing this tax reform, which is controversial. And so giving them political cover in order to make the decision so we can actually get this done. Trump is interested in getting his agenda through. And as being involved in leadership, sometimes you got to become that common enemy so that people can come together and move forward. And I think that's what he was willing to do. He said in the meeting, the reason I'm saying that is this. There was one thing that kept coming up at one point was Trump said, I'll take the heat. I'll take the heat. I love the heat. Well, it kind of got ignored. And I'm like, I was thinking this thing through and something was not right here. And all of a sudden it dawned on me. It's like, well, he was saying that over and over. And Steny Hoyer was having troubles until he's like, hey, I'll take the heat. And I think that there was probably some gamesmanship that went on. Like I said, Hollywood is, DC is Hollywood for ugly people. And they're great politicians because they're great actors. Anyway, I hope this was enlightening. And again, if not that, entertaining at least. I didn't want to waste your time. The next thing I ask is please, I know some people have watched, please also like, because that helps out in the algorithms. I love doing this. I hope what I do has some value. I want to keep earning that value. And so if you can also make sure, if you haven't, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. And as always, this isn't the real world. If I fail to earn your trust and continue to earn that, your loyalty, you can just unsubscribe. And again, there will be no hard feelings. But I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk to you later.